Good afternoon, dear colleagues, and thank you for the organizers to give me the opportunity to contribute to today's session. Although I would have preferred to be with you in person, and due to some logistical issues, I'm nonetheless grateful to be able to share a few reflections on what is becoming one of the most defining challenges of our time: communicating science and managing risk in an environment where information and particularly misinformation travel faster than validation. As food scientists and as regulators, we have long focused on accuracy. But today, accuracy must live alongside agility and authenticity. Social media is not just a communication tool, it has become an ecosystem that shapes public trust. How we operate in it will determine whether science remains a credible voice in public decision making. Now, in this slide, I believe we try to say it all. Information now spreads globally before verification even begins. A recall alert, a food additive rumor, or a viral chemical scare can create a narrative long before experts are even consulted. Once trust is damaged, however, it takes years to be rebuilt. And in food systems, trust is everything. This is why we must view communication as an integral part of risk analysis and not as an afterthought. Now, we used to communicate primarily through intermediaries. We used to rely on media, we used to rely on third parties, whether trade associations or non-for-profit organizations, or even through publication of official bulletins. Today, we share the stage with activists, with influencers, and algorithm-driven platforms that amplify emotion before basing this dissemination on evidence. This is not something that we can control, but something that we must learn to navigate. Science cannot remain in closed rooms. It needs to be present. It needs to be understandable in the very spaces where misinformation may thrive. Now, the Codex Alimentarius Commission has long defined risk communication as an interactive process. It is the interactive exchange of information amongst all the various partners that contribute in the risk analysis paradigm. So amongst assessors, managers, and the overall stakeholder community. But today, interaction goes beyond institutional boundaries. It is between scientists and citizens, between regulators and consumers. We must therefore shift from telling people what we know to sharing how we know it, to showing the process. Transparency is a key element in this process, and also showing the level of concern that we have with an issue and sharing that in a timely fashion. People don't just want data, they want reassurance. They want reassurance that the decisions that will be made, whether be it by industry or by regulators, are in fact guided by science, but also are painted with empathy. Misinformation tends to win because it is simple, it is emotional, and tends to be visual. Science, on the other hand, is cautious. It deals with nuance and it deals with uncertainty. We need to bridge the gap. If we don't make the science accessible, others will fill the void with distortion. A perfect illustration is the narrative around the so-called ultra-processed food, a complex scientific discussion reduced to a slogan of the likes: processed is bad, unprocessed is good, or processed means harmful. This is emotionally powerful, but scientifically weak. Now, the principles that you see before you come directly from the Codex guidance. Being first doesn't mean being reckless. It means acknowledging issues early enough before misinformation dominates the space. Being transparent is a key element to build credibility, even when uncertainty remains. And above all, consistency and humanity makes science relatable. Our job is not just to communicate data, but to communicate confidence in the scientific process that led to the generation of these data, or to the use of this data to develop the decision-making process. Now, this example, again, going back to the processing debate, is actually quite, I shall say, personal for IOFOST, for the International Union of Food Science and Technology. The narrative that is being propagated shows how quickly social media can turn an academic model of food classification into a policy movement. At the International Union of Food Science and Technology, our goal has not been to oppose the discussion, but to restore scientific context, to show that processing is not the enemy of health, but a vital contributor to safety, nutrition, and sustainability. This is why we have invested over the past period in the development of a potential evidence-based and a different system of food classification, a multi-attribute evidence-based model. And we have been working not only with food scientists, but also with nutrition scientists, with the collaboration that we have been building and we continue to nurture with the International Union of Nutrition Science, and bringing also the discussion to the fora where the policy agendas that might be resulting from this discourse may have an impact, and bringing the discussion to Codex, where essentially we can have the impact on health, on agriculture, and on trade, is probably the right form to ensure that the global dialogue continues to be based on science and not only on emotion. Now, when we talk about risk communication, particularly during crisis, one of the clearest historical lessons comes from an incident that I had, I don't know if I can say the privilege to live and to learn from, particularly during a couple of, over a decade ago. And that's the incident of the melamine contamination, which occurred in 2007 and reoccurred in 2008. In this particular case, adulteration of milk powder with melamine to falsify protein content led to tens of thousands of infant illnesses and several fatalities. The event immediately triggered a wave of public outrage and global recalls, and crucially, an explosion of misinformation online and across media. At the time, thankfully, I would say, social media was not as potent as it is right now, but we can learn from the way this incident was managed. What eventually stabilized the situation was a more unified, evidence-based response. Once data from national authorities, from Codex and its parent organizations, FAO and WHO, also from science-driven organizations and their laboratories were consolidated, and when scientific assessments were made available and accessible, public understanding and confidence began to recover. Wherever the messaging was clear, explaining how exposure levels were being evaluated, how affected products were traced, how products were withdrawn, the space for rumors got narrowed. Contrast that with what happens when regulators potentially disagree publicly, either on the science itself or on the rationale behind a management decision. When communication is fragmented, detractors and opportunists quickly fill the gap, amplifying confusion and mistrust. The lesson is not that we must avoid scientific debate, Science, by nature, advances through discussion and disagreement. But we must communicate openly about why differences exist and what evidence each position rests upon. As scientists, and also as regulators, we have to be disciplined about one crucial boundary. We cannot color policy decisions with a science color when there is no scientific substantiation, particularly behind a policy decision. If a decision is policy driven, we should say so transparently. When we blur that line and when we present policy preferences as if they were scientific conclusions, we undermine both science and policy credibility. The melamine episode showed that when the risk management response is unified or at least convergent, transparent, and supported by published evidence, misinformation loses momentum. But when we let fragmentation or opaque decision-making persist, the narrative escapes our hands. This is why coordinated communication across agencies, across borders, and between science and policy is as essential as any technical or food control measure that is aimed to contribute to risk management. Of course, in all this, preparedness is key. We should treat communication like any other component of risk management. It has to be planned, it has to be sometimes rehearsed, and it has to be necessarily resourced. Reliance on pre-approved templates, making sure that we have trained spokespersons help us save times when every minute counts. And as we know, in a crisis context, in an incident management situation, every minute counts. And the biggest enemy is time. And let's not underestimate the role of visuals or the roles of partnerships. Working with trusted voices outside our institution often multiplies our reach and also amplifies the impact of the communication that we're aiming for. Trust is also cumulative. It's built long before a crisis. If the public only hears from us or from communicators, particularly from regulators and public health officials, when there is a problem, it would be already too late. Regular engagement, open data portals, educational partnerships, and media collaboration helps create familiarity, helps create predictability, which are the bedrocks of credibility. At IUFOST and within its disciplinary organization for food regulatory science, that is the Global Food Regulatory Science Society, this is exactly what we aim to contribute to foster globally. Now, if there is one message to take away today is that silence creates misinformation. Social media should not be considered as our adversary. It's simply where the modern public conversation is happening today. Our role as scientists, as regulators, as stakeholders of the food systems is to be present, to be clear, and also to put our humanity or our human side in these conversations. The tools have changed, but our mission remains the same: protecting consumers through scientific evidence that is a key element to building trust. Now, this is the final thought that will capture primarily our shared responsibility. No matter how much data we produce, credibility remains our strongest and most fragile asset. It is earned through openness, through empathy, and a willingness to engage, not only when it's easy, but especially when it's difficult. Now, before ending this presentation, I would like also to use this opportunity for transparency's sake to also declare, make a declaration of interest in that my activities and our team's research activities are funded from various sources, including government funding international organizations funding non-for-profit organizations, as well as funding provided by the food industry. Once again, I'm very thankful to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to contribute to the discussion today. I apologize for not having been able to join you today, and I'm sorry actually for this fact, and looking forward to the continued dialogue on this topic, and thanking you also for your collective commitment to keeping science credible in an age of noise. Thank you very much, and I wish you a great continuation of the meeting.